Mark Munsell, Distinguished Fellow of AI at Lindenwood University and also Economic Development Strategist at GeoFutures STL. It's a privilege to have you on Geospatial FM.
Good to be here, Wilfred.
Okay, so as was outlined in the invite for everyone, we've got a 9-point agenda here. So let's get cracking. So then what did you achieve as an inventor, Mark?
Yeah, so just trying to do a quick summary of my career. I started with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration many, many years ago, back in 1990. And while I guess I wouldn't classify myself as an inventor then, I was inventing things. So, and by inventing things, typically problems were handed to me that were sort of digital transformation problems. And this is in the early days of computers. When they were rare and most people did not have them on their desks. But some of the stuff I did early on were to like rewrite Fortran programs and code and things like that yeah, go ahead and admit, Nick. For things like geodesy, like the National Geodetic Service, right? My job at NOAA was to do surveying, to do mapping, to do photogrammetry, but to do it all in sort of the new digital media era of writing a bunch of code for the agency. So I just lay that out there as, you know, a new graduate from college in the geospatial domain. We didn't even call it that then. It was mapping, geodesy, cartography, aerial photography, all of that stuff. And you know, kind of already set my career in motion to do what was essentially, you know, coding and digital transformation. So every job I had from then on in my life, if that wasn't my primary activity in my job in the geospatial realm, it quickly became that because I would get bored of whatever manual labor they expected me to do. And I typically would write programs to do it for me. And so I did that over and over again. In some cases, I displaced like entire programs. You know, maybe that's not something to be proud of. And when I say that, I mean, I didn't put people out of work, but disrupted some big programs in doing that. And some of these things that I did on the weekends and the evenings, and again, sort of set my reputation up, to include replacing entire systems to do nautical charting at NOAA, replacing all of the defense mapping agencies' system to do aeronautical charting and create aeronautical data that goes into the cockpits of all of the 15,000 military aviation aircraft. And eventually I was actually ripped from the government. This gets into my invention story. I was a reduction force from the government at the Defense Mapping Agency in the mid-90s, and literally sat in one cube on a Friday with a boss doing a job, on Monday sitting in the same cube with the same boss doing the same job, but making a lot more money as a contractor, because that's what the United States government did in the 90s. And that kind of it kind of freed my mind about what it meant to be a government employee versus a contractor or someone in business. So after a year or two doing that, I left and started my own business, which essentially was taking the government data and government products and services and turning them into a commercial product and service. So taking that data that we did for aviation, and I turned it into the first online graphical flight planners and maritime trip planners in the world, and started that company. And so just like Google Maps, except for pilots. Yeah, that's
so
fair,
you're talking about the
that.
90s here, right?
Yep.
And if you're talking about the first online system for doing that, is this sort of around the time 1994 when the general public became aware of the internet?
So this would have been about 2000 when I did that.
Okay.
So kind of, you know, early days of the internet boom, right? Beginning of the sort of boom. So the internet was off and running, but it was still kind of for geeks. So commerce really started in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's where we caught the eye. We pitched this idea to some investors, and they funded us, and we started the company and built this and sold it. We had a couple of suitors about 5 years later. We had Boeing Aircraft that wanted to buy the aviation planning business, and we had SAIC, which is kind of a Beltway bandit, that wanted to buy our government contracting business, and we sold to SAIC. So that was my first kind of taste of building something from scratch. I built the server racks out of 2x4s. I literally bought the computers at stores, put them on the 2x4 racks, plugged them in, had to rewire the power in my basement to be able to handle the load of about what was like 12 or 15 servers, and wrote all the software to do this and monitored it literally from my bed above it, my bedroom, where I coded some of the monitoring to give certain audible cues. And much to my wife's horror, would wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes based on those cues as to what was happening in our server room below our bedroom. So we tell stories about this. It was good training for me. It was good business experience for me. Building stuff from scratch was kind of what I've been doing most of my life. After selling that company, I went back to work for the government. So by that time, it was the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. At that time, the wars had started. I'll just call them the wars. And felt a little bit of a calling to serve my country during that time. And I did things like deploy to Iraq. I did operational jobs for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I did a lot of technical jobs. I became a technical executive. I ran the agency's IT operations for many years, became the chief technology officer for several years. And then eventually I left and went to work for AWS for a while and worked on some big stuff for them. Went back to the NGA and worked on mostly AI projects for the last 5 years, culminating with what I was the chief artificial intelligence officer. So, which was a great privilege, and kind of will get us into this next part of the discussion. Got to see AI, the promise of AI enabled by a lot of data, enabled by a lot of compute, enabled by a certain amount of investment the Department of Defense made to try it, to get it going. And that is something that most people, don't get to do. Now, at the same time, there were some big investments happening, right? Google and OpenAI started getting big investments, and they actually had less bureaucracy to deal with. The Department of Defense has a huge bureaucracy, and we're able to invent things that we certainly coveted, and eventually worked with them on a couple of different projects, and I can talk a little bit about that as well. So, great experience. Very proud of my work for national security. Very proud of the work that I've done in terms of building stuff from scratch. I'm a builder at heart, and just happy to be here to talk about this with you, Wilfred, moving forward.
Sure. Yeah, okay. A mind-blowing introduction, Mark. I really feel like I'm ascending the ranks of guests here. Maybe I can say the podcast has arrived. No, it's all you, Mark. Okay. So there's a constant problem in being a podcast host, that any single answer will suddenly open up a whole new world, and the whole agenda for the rest of the podcast is now not interesting because just this one topic is fascinating that you've raised. I want to just pause for maybe just a minute for some extra detail on what sounds like a fairly high stakes geospatial output, if you like. So, nautical charting, and also charts or a flight planning system in a military context. Is there a story you can tell about, everyone sort of wants a story of something going wrong and then you save the day or something. Yeah. Is there something interesting? Because there has to be just a whole podcast here, but we need a minute just on digging on that bit.
I'll paint some broad strokes here. This is going to sound a little grim, but sometimes in the bureaucracy, this element we call safety navigation inside of NGA, very important. very important as operational aspect of what the agency does. Literally shows the way. You know, makes nautical charts, makes aeronautical charts, makes flight information data that loads into a flight management system that literally will land the airplane. And when I say that, I mean fly a terminal approach to a runway and get automatically with instruments, get that pilot to hopefully the point where they can see the runway and land the airplane, right? You know, right at the, and so literally fly the airplane and deliver souls and cargo to wherever they need, or missiles or bombs, whatever. So there was a lot of tension in the different domains and tribes in the agency. Safety navigation folks were typically retired aviators, former aviators, air traffic controls. They had their tribe, and they were very serious about taking care of all of their fellow aviators that relied on that data and information. The other tribes in NGA, one of them, the most powerful one, was sort of the image analysts that were, you know, were less of scientists and more of conveyors, writers, majored in political science, maybe law school, maybe, you know, have an affinity for geopolitics. When they looked at imagery, when they wrote these beautiful narratives, those things wound up on the president's desk. Very important policy-making decisions, diplomatic decisions, warfighting decisions were made from that. Two different groups, and a lot of times the people that briefed the president wound up with the majority of the budget. So when it came time to budget and build and renew data and systems on the safety navigation side, there was a very grim saying that we used to have, which was, well, this won't happen unless someone dies, right? Someone gives their life to do that. And it did happen several times in my career where aviators either did make a mistake or a mariner, a submariner did run into a mountain, an undersea mountain that wasn't charted, or, you know, variety of different accidents that did happen where they would come back to the agency and say, why didn't you chart that underground mountain, that undersea mountain? And that was simply because we didn't have enough resources to, you know, to chart the world, to model the world at the accuracy needed to be able to conduct these operations. And so
this term undersea mountain, Mark, I think that's the kind of unique terminology and concepts in a certain way you're bringing into our minds, the idea that really submarines are flying. They just have to fly in a fluid, and they, uncharted mountains matter. Yeah.
I also had a grim habit when I ran my commercial business that whenever we saw an aircraft crash on the news, we quickly went to the database to make sure they weren't using our product.
Okay, sure. Yep.
These are the things that kept me up at night. You know, I've had.
I don't want to sound like an ambulance chaser, but you have brought some color there. Maybe I can say, but definitely curious then about a whole other episode. Digging in more. All right. Well, we better continue on with the original plan. So you're at the end of your career, as it were. It's not as though you've stopped engaging. But there's a benefit of that a lot of us don't have. You have a lifetime that you can reflect on now about the hype cycles that have come along. That when they came along must have been incredibly meaningful, but with the lifetime of insight that you now have, perhaps are less consequential. So, what are your reflections on hype cycles from this career to help us understand the current one?
Yeah, when I look back like on 30 years, and I look at all the different hype cycles, and there were a lot. You know, the big waves that came along, that everyone jumped on board, where the hype cycle was sort of self-hyping. If you look back at those all made a difference. Those were all impactful. Let's just cut my career in half and say, like, the cloud. Let's say, the internet. But I mean,
that's the biggest.
I go back to 2000. I go back to that time when I started my company, And there was a ton of hype, a ton of hype. We can do anything with this technology. Think, you can't even imagine the things that we can do with this technology. And the amount of money that was pouring into it was insane. So insane that at some point somebody panicked, right? And the bubble popped a couple times, and it was all right and good. But now, if you look back over the last 30 years, you're like, yeah, the internet was a good. It's changed our lives. There's so much we built upon it. So then the cloud, I say, was a pretty, not as big as the internet, but still big. And you talk about hype. The people that sold the cloud, that was a lot of selling. And then you look at this most recent one with AI. Let's say in the last 5 years. I'm only going to go back 10 years. So let's just say 5 years. It's in almost every LinkedIn post. I can't even like make a LinkedIn
writes
post.
The LinkedIn posts,
Yeah,
Mark.
that's right.
This is the problem.
so sure, is it overhyped? It is. But now when I personally think back on these cycles, how did I perceive them? What was the role? I was cynical just to tell jokes, just to make everyone laugh, just to whatever the sort of nervous laughter that you had about, hey, we're all going to move to the cloud. That's a little, it was a little weird for me. I had my own servers in my basement, right? So it was a hype that I'm a salesman too. So it was a hype that I took advantage of. And I've taken advantage of the hype cycles to be able to push what I think are good and righteous ideas, things that we should change. For example, the cloud hype cycle. How badly we should run and give our money to AWS or Google or Microsoft. That wasn't the thing for me. The thing for me was I was going to give builders new tools. I was going to erase tech debt by moving house. I was going to take all this old code that was 30 years old, that was decrepit and dying, and put it on a new platform, refactor it, rewrite it. These were the reasons that that I would gladly walk into a room and sell the cloud to my superiors, was because of all of the good things that can happen from the hype. Same with AI.
Okay, I like this provocative response that you're taking, because it's so common for the usual refrain to be, oh, hype cycle bad. But your point is that it's an opportunity to clean house or set up new infrastructure, bring new ideas in, solve things in a more efficient way, perhaps. And also the message I got from you is that, maybe initially in the first version of the hype cycle, people bit off too much, more than they could chew. But there were seeds were sown, maybe. Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, it's the same as like when the Submariner hit the mountain. Nobody wants that. But now that it's happened and people are turning to you and saying, do you need more resources? Are there things that you need? Are there things that you need to do? That's exactly what's happened with these other hype cycles. Do you need more money for AI, Mark? Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good.
But I mean,
maybe
I'm building out some new infrastructure. Maybe I'm upgrading the networks. Maybe all these other things. But yes, I need money for AI.
Yeah. Okay. So if I can offer something of a summary from what I have seen from even from the likes of Steve Eisman, who you might remember from The Big Short. It's interesting to see some of his commentary. Anyway, so the theme of the commentary around the internet stocks bubble, or the tech bubble that sort of crashed around 2000, 2001, was that it wasn't about all of the Amazon.com and all these websites. It was about fiber optic build out, and so there's a hardware build out actually underneath all of this software froth, if you like. And also lately there's a data center build out actually that's going on that is really underneath all of this AI froth and bubble on top. And what happened 25 years ago was that a lot of that fiber was dark, And there seems to be another theme here of a lot of dark data centers being built because they don't have any power. So that's an interesting, theme there. I thought.
Yeah, and I think that again, sort of what will be probably some bubbles popping, some waves to ride up and down in the next 5 years, 10 years, or whatever it is, with the sort of fits and starts of that will happen here, is I don't see like these huge data centers just dying and going away, right? Or unused, and they'll be used, right? They'll be used, and so
Right.
um, uh, that the second and third order effects of these things are really what counts, right?
Okay. All right. We're just waiting for GE to build a few more gas
Yeah,
turbines,
yeah.
and we'll be good. Okay.
Or
All
maybe,
right then.
hey, maybe this will drive this sort of small nuclear reactors
Yeah.
to, all the other things that need to happen to make this work.
Yeah.
Again, the third order effects are amazing. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I certainly in my engineering career have come across that a few times, and nothing ever seemed to get them really across the line. Hopefully, possibly, it will be this. Okay, then. So building on this theme, then I perhaps around the fringes of the theme of AI commentary on LinkedIn. The theme of it seems to be LLMs, but there's an emerging theme of world models. And in this famous defection of Jan LeCun from Meta, and a billion plus startup that he's got, advanced machine intelligence, that seems to be based on this idea of world models as how we can get to superintelligence, so called. So I also came across you on LinkedIn, Mark, writing about world models. Can you explain?
Yeah. So certainly I think that again, even 2 years ago, maybe certainly 3 years ago, um, the folks that build the LLMs, the folks that the Anthropics and the Googles and the OpenAIs, they were projecting then what they thought these LLMs could do, and it was pretty fascinating stuff, pretty remarkable stuff. But most people still didn't quite get it or believe it. Um, if you look what they predicted 2 or 3 years ago as to what their capabilities are now, they're tracking. In fact, I think that they have stuff on the shelf already built, or at least near-term projections that will just sort of knock the socks off of what we even have today. And if you think about what those models are able to do, um, they're going to do jobs. They're going to do jobs that they're going to do medicine. They're going to do law. They're going to do accounting. It's going to happen. You can't sort of say that it's not going to happen, because it is. You can see it happening right now. And so everything that happens behind the glass, these information jobs and these knowledge-based jobs, certainly will be disrupted. I mean, they're not going to go away. I think the sort of responsible entities, responsible humans to do these things, to take responsibility for healthcare, to take responsibility for law, that will still be there. Certainly they'll be enabled. Certainly they'll have to do the work of 5 lawyers instead of 1, right? So all of these other things will happen, and we'll see that trajectory over the next 5 years, 10 years. What is still missing, and what if you're starting to place 10-year bets, if you're a fund that is really looking out, and you want to put big money, big 10-year money, or even 20-year money on some things, it's not that anymore. I mean, you can potentially still get a good return on some of these companies that are doing this, because they're going to grow, but it's not the same kind of return as if you invested 5 years ago, right? $1 5 years ago than today. So where can they put their bets today? And I think a lot of people are starting to put their bets on what this sort of big gap is what happens. How do you take AI from behind the screen, behind the glass, and have it operate in the real world? And you can do that on sort of a micro scale. I think I told you a story about.
So you're saying you're done with the white collar jobs and it's time for the blue collar jobs?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I think you'll still have a lawyer that's passed the bar exam and is licensed by the state. It's just that person will have to do the work of what used to be 5 lawyers, right? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what we would all really enjoy is AI that does things in the real world. Self-driving cars. That's kind of the flagship example. And you see the progress that's been made there. I mean, some of that stuff's been a 10-year run, 15 years trying to get these things to work. And people would have given up a long time ago. I think what's happened with LLMs, what's happened with agentic, what's happened with all of the frontier models, breathing new life into all of these things that people have been working on for many, many years. So getting AI to operate in the real world, to use real tools, to navigate space and time, to fix the siding on your house, to dig wells, to chop wood. I mean, all the hard labor stuff is certainly ripe for capital investment, ripe for invention, ripe for innovation. And I can see what it takes to sense the real world, to understand, analyze in context what's happening in the real world. All of the remote sensing things that we've been working on for 30 years. How do you remotely sense in the micro environment? And of course, we'll talk about here in a second in the macro environment, in the global environment. I think there's great potential there. But I think that, the real opportunity to invent something useful in this next phase, and the next phase is probably 5 to 15 years, is operating AI from behind the glass, out of the glass, into the real world.
Okay, so there's a couple of themes really that we can attach this to, I feel. So it seems like, every couple of days we see an amazing announcement of dancing robots or something, especially coming out of China. You mentioned autonomous vehicles. So are these two examples what world models are about? Or what they enable? Or maybe then the easiest thing is just to shift to the next agenda item is, in your view, the notable achievements by world model companies.
I mean, I think self-driving cars, I mean, you have to model roadways and everything in and around roads. That's not easy to do. That's super complicated too, very complicated, especially when you inject all of the other variables of people, other cars, other things that you can't predict, things that aren't static, things that are dynamic and moving,
Flooding
all of that
as well.
Yeah. And so modeling the world, right, is what these other world models want to do. That's their attempt. It's just, what scope are you trying to do? What scope of modeling the world are you trying to do? I mean, modeling the world is hard. It's the hardest thing. And in the intelligence agency that I come from, they're trying to model the world, and usually at a very micro level. We have analysts that maybe spent years looking at one facility and the patterns of the one facility and the behaviors of vehicles, the behaviors of people in association with the facility, the behaviors of the facility itself, whether it's emanating information or heat or whatever. I mean, to build a model of just one facility and all of the physical attributes, plus the behavioral attributes, plus the dynamics of it being connected to all the other dependencies and interdependencies, super complicated.
Right. Yes. I love the insight from the intelligence world that you can bring.
A trillion times over. It's all about scope, right? It's all about scope. Yeah. So the roads are defined scope, mostly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's the same. It's in the same class of problems. It's using the same types of solutions, remote sensing mostly, at least to start. It's having to use massive amounts of data, bringing that data together in a way that is accessible at high speeds, and then building models to be able to, emulate, simulate, and predict what's going to happen in those environments. It's the same It's the same thing that we're trying to do with geospatial, except now when we talk about world models from some of the companies that are working on these geospatial foundation models, right, using embeddings and things like that. They're starting with the sort of classic problems of the sort of macro views of fields, buildings, the zoomed out some, and it's remarkable what they've been able to do.
Yeah, okay. There's a whole slew of, because perhaps most of the audience might be aware of my amateurish efforts to track every single last geospatial company on the planet, my world model from a stock trading perspective, if you like. So through these efforts, I'm aware of hum.ai, World Labs, Legend, just LGND, Silurian, what else? That World Labs was from Fei Li, who's another luminary in this world modeling arena. Advanced machine intelligence, as I mentioned before. And then there's what Google's doing. So, and there's the whole world of intelligence that I have no idea about and that we have the privilege of hearing some details from you about. So amongst all of these organizations and whatever others that spring to mind for you, are there any notable achievements in what's happened with the world model approach to AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe it's pedestrian now, but I think that what Google did, over the summer with Alpha Earth, I think is a moment, right? And again, let's, all of the sort of building blocks to get there. The fact that they have the compute to be able to do something like that, the fact that they have the data to be able to do something like that. In the evolution of the hype cycles that we've already covered the internet, which would be required to take all of humankind's knowledge and digitize it for an LLM. The cloud, right, to build massive compute and storage that you didn't have before. To get up to the point where Google can do something like they have. Google also developing expertise in geospatial things, right? In the Google Maps and Google Earth and all of that as well. So all of those sort of the magic ingredients have come together to be able for them to draw the new chalk line in the middle of last year now, to release that, and just a moment where you've abstracted so much. What used to be 100 clicks, menu items, buttons in ArcGIS and build your own little sort of workflow model to do this query, to get this result set, to do a calculation, to blah, 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 to do all of that. And to be able to now ask this model sort of human-based language questions kind of, and it return what would be very complicated data queries, pipelines, and have it just sort of return it in easy, simplified form. I think it's the beginnings of a change. I think companies like Esri have to really look at this.
I'm okay if they don't.
Yeah.
Let's use this as a reset. You said that hype cycles are a way to reset. Let's go.
It certainly is. Esri's traditionally conservative. And it's because they carry a tech debt of millions of users that have installed their software on their workstations and working on what are micro problems mostly, right? And this is what Google's done is massive data, massive compute working on a macro problem. Just two different kind of business approaches, but obviously, Esri having expertise in the entire domain. So go ahead.
Google has done what only a company which, in a sense, birthed the internet and surely owns one of the largest fleets of data centers, has invented their own TPUs, not to mention having, 50% of the world's intellectual capital about matters to do with these things. They have taken
is it 13,000 PhDs?
They are a vacuum cleaner for them. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we're all we should prepare to just be in awe of them continuing to blaze trail. So
but then
can I
they
just,
freely released, right, these embeddings
and of course
to,
it was released for free. Yeah. So
yeah.
good luck to anyone. There's one more minor point I wanted to put in front of you before we carry on with the rest of the agenda. So also something that's come up on social media recently was a lovely example of how autonomous systems still fail graphically. And it was a Waymo going straight into a flooded street without any awareness, despite its massive array of sensors, that there was more than a foot of water. And it was just glorious. It plowed straight into the water and stopped right in the middle of it. And the poor passenger, was struggling to sort of get out. Not that he was drowning or anything, but the clip ended with him trying to wind down the window and see what's next. So for all of our what we are supposed to think about progress here, Waymos are still doing that.
Yeah, so like I said before, modeling the world is hard. How many different scenarios can a Waymo vehicle encounter? Trillions, right? I mean, it's a lot. And so,
Right.
so I mean, think of the way that LLMs have been trained. They've been trained on the entire exhaust of the internet, everything, right? So anything a human has thought in the last 30 years and decided to put it on the internet, or books written and all this kind of stuff. And so,
God help us.
yeah, so the only way to train these world models is to try to train them on every scenario, every situation, every possibility that the world can present
Yeah.
a vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and
So I hope.
so there's still, some people computer vision, right? Some people have argued that, hey, there's no reason to train computer vision models anymore because it can train itself. It can train itself. Models can automatically detect that there's something there, and after a certain amount of context, certain amount of relationships, that oh, that's a boat. Figures out that it's a boat. But the only reason to figure out that it's a boat because some human labeled a boat some time ago, right? And labeled enough of those that it's able to do that. So there are still, Wilfred, hundreds of millions of things that we haven't labeled. And
it was just such a compelling example of such a graphic error by one of these systems. I just couldn't help but this is like the benchmark, if you like. Does the Waymo still drive into the flood this year?
Yeah.
I feel like this is an inverted benchmark.
Again, it could have been a computer vision model that they were like, hey, that looks like another road. It looks like it doesn't look like water. You could have also obviously could have been a flood zone or something like that, and you could have used that information to say, hey, no, don't drive through the flood zone or whatever. Obviously, other sensors.
Or to increase the tolerance for whatever inputs it, and the threshold for this is water as the output in areas with predicted inundation. So there's all sorts of tuning.
Maybe there should be a water sensor
that's apparent that has been done.
Once it reaches a certain level, the car is slowly driving in the water. It's like, hey, we're at 3 inches now. Right. Back up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just wanted to put that in front of you. All right. Cool. So we've got
the point I want to make is that you still the humans still have to tell the computer what things are and what they are in context and how important they are and how unimportant they are. That still has to happen. And so there's still a lot of work to do there. There's still a ton of training the computers what to do.
Yeah, okay. And for entrepreneurs then, a LiDAR data or a radar data, let alone other inputs, labeling service seems like a straightforward business to start here.
Sure, certainly.
Yeah.
Think there's a tree company. You think, well, I think all the trees have been labeled. No, they haven't. They certainly haven't. And all the trees haven't been labeled from like every angle, right?
Yeah.
People are out taking pictures of trees. That's a really good start. But
so you could have the oblique tree labeling company.
Sure.
And you've got a business. Okay.
Sure.
All right. We're being productive here, Mark. That's what I want. Okay. So for the last bit of the hour or however long it ends up going with you, I wanted some applications, if you like, of your experience and knowledge here. So we heard a bit about your GEOINT, if you like, geospatial intelligence career. Can you touch on a few use cases?
For GeoInt? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of one of the offices that I ran.
And bearing in mind, sorry to butt in, bearing in mind, we've just had a very significant military intervention, which presumably involved a lot of geo in Venezuela recently. So feel free in
and I
that
don't know if
context.
you noticed that the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Raisin Kane, which, by the way, I think that's why Trump picked him. I think he loved his call sign. I think that's the main. He's a great general. He's a brilliant chairman. I give him all credit. But he actually called out NGA. That was nice. He said CIA, NSA, and NGAs. I think the three that he mentioned. And yeah, you know, for that particular example, of course, I'm not in the agency anymore, and so this is all speculation. But they probably had that place mapped to the centimeter. They had 3D models of that place. They had high resolution imagery of every nook and cranny of that entire area. They went through every contingency. They had every angle mapped, every potential sniper or sniper placement that they put down. I mean, they had that thing so well mapped, so well modeled. Back to our sort of micro.
Would it have been a BIM model?
It could, yeah. I mean, sure, yeah. Probably was a physical model as well. Depending on how long they had, and how long they've been planning. I just, it's all speculation. You know, we built physical models to scale of things in the past, so that
I read in the news that they did make a physical, yeah.
Yeah, so that in this case, Delta Force could rehearse, right? That, you know, the guys that went in there. So don't put that past anybody that they didn't do that or did do that. It's just all about how much time they had and how much risk they were willing to take to get into it. But certainly understanding the terrain, understanding the buildings, understanding what's in the buildings, understanding the materials of the buildings, understanding everything about it. Also doing probably all kinds of targeting contingency plans. If something did go wrong, where did they strike and when? How, you know, various different egress strategies. I mean, you know, it just goes on and on, probably the work that they did. So one of the jobs that I had at the agency, one of the offices that I managed was the director of targeting and transnational issues. And so targeting is a thing where you go into great detail, what I just mentioned, right? Whether it's targeting with kinetic coordinate seeking weapons, or whether it's targeting with assaulters that go in and capture or kill somebody. So that's the thing. That's GEOINT 101. That's why we have it. It really is. The other things that we did on the transnational issues, think of all the different things that you can use GEOINT for that maybe aren't as straightforward, like GEOINT support to cyber operations, GEOINT support to cyber defense. Think about that. So if you're trying to defend against a cyber attack, a lot of times those cyber attacks are run by human bad actors. And so what does it take to find and locate and disable a cyber attack that is being enabled by physical entities?
In the end, that person has a physical location.
Or a data center, or a fiber optic line, right? These are all things that there's an application for geospatial technology to help solve those problems. And that's one example, and the list just goes on and on and on and on, right?
It's wild. It's just amazing, the applications of our profession. It's mind-blowing, really. And I think I already discussed this with you before. It's impossible now, the size of this world model 500 with these 500 stocks, just to stay on top of the financial aspect of our industry, let alone track down every single last rabbit hole that our industry is sort of applied in. Well, so yeah, thanks for some interesting examples.
It's up to the imagination what you can use geospatial technology to solve the problems. The problem here, though, with the 500 and with what I'm trying to do here in St. Louis, I'm transitioning into that.
Yes.
I mean, these are all very important use cases that I'm talking about that governments, sovereign nations are certainly willing to invest in to be able to have this capability. And because of that, the gravity is toward those investments. It just is. Because, countries are willing to pay for a satellite that gives them an advantage, whether it's economic advantage, whether it's military advantage, whatever it is. It's a sovereign nation is able to use that tool and use that technology and use that special tradecraft to give them an advantage. So the multiplier on the dollar is great. It's great. It gets much more complicated though when you try to use it for business use cases. And while it's still up to the imagination of what you can use it for, and the people that are the most creative wind up right with the best uses, and they're able to make money from some of those uses. It's not as straightforward as most businesses require, right? The abilities, the capabilities.
Okay, so this initiative in St. Louis is called GeoSTL. Can you tell us a bit more about its origins and some success stories?
So for a few years now, there's been an economic development organization in St. Louis that does broad economic development work strategy, trying to attract businesses, trying to support economies, whether it's Anheuser-Busch is in St. Louis and still is the North American headquarters, whether it's Ralston Purina, who makes dog food, whether it's MasterCard, who has a huge headquarters in St. Louis, whether it's Enterprise Mobility, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, tens of billions of dollars a year in revenue. There are economies in St. Louis that we try to bolster, that we try to support, and more importantly, try to attract new business to the area. One of those economies is the geospatial technology economy. And much of that is based on national security. Much of that is based on NGA's Western headquarters is in St. Louis, and they just built a new one. They just opened it up in September. People are moving in there now. And what this particular effort is trying to take advantage of is that visibility, trying to take advantage of what the directors of those agencies have pledged to do, which is to be in the community, not just a fortress, right? A walled fortress inside the community, but to be in the community, to participate in the community, to welcome the community in, to establish new businesses that support that new campus in St. Louis, to develop the area around it with infrastructure upgrades, with hotels and restaurants and all of these things. So the idea is to support that economy that is today, cultivate it inside of that economy to try to find inventors, to try to find innovators, to try to find startups that maybe they learned something like myself. I learned about aeronautical aviation navigation and started a commercial business to, with that military knowledge and data that I had, to find those people inside of that economy, identify them, give them venture capital support, and build new businesses that offer new products and services.
Okay, so clearly I should move immediately to St. Louis with my oblique tree lidar data labeling company and expect billions
Scale
of
AI. Scale AI has hundreds of employees in St. Louis because they have a contract with the NGA and with the Department of Defense to do labeling. So it's that's the example. What you just said happens here in St. Louis. And for you to hang out with those guys and drink a beer with those guys and pick up some tips from those guys for your tree company, maybe even hire a couple of them away, is exactly what you want to do.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it is all about the beer and the networking. And
Yeah.
I've the 6 countries I've worked in so far. It's been fascinating seeing how that networking happens. In each of them. So, is there some sort of geo meetup event that happens regularly at a particular venue, or is that still something you guys are starting up?
So there is, and there has been, and it is. We are new. This organization is new. It's being spun out of the broader CITF. It's being spun out of the broader uh, economic development organization into a new organization called GeoSTL. And it's just
Yeah.
starting this month in January, the new organization,
Okay.
where we will, and there are events, there are things. You can go to T-Rex's website, T-Rex, St. Louis,
Okay.
and you can see all of the events that they have already that are part of this. There are organizations in St. Louis that support. There are universities that support this. There's a great geospatial research activity at St. Louis University, among others in the area. So Lindenwood University, the one that I helped, the Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. These are feeder programs a lot of times into NGA, but also have great research that's happening. The Taylor Geospatial Institute
Yeah.
is a institute, sort of a consortium of the other universities that, and the Taylor Geospatial Engine actually sponsored some of the extracting out the embeddings out of Alpha Earth and putting them on the open network.
Excellent.
So
And naturally, we have had Taylor Geospatial Institute on the podcast and the
yeah,
field boundaries that they've been
yeah,
involved in producing. Okay, fantastic. So then maybe we can move on to the last question, Mark, which is, why are you interested in
yeah.
this collection of companies that I've slaved over since the end of 2022? What kind of insight do you
I'm
need
glad, and I'm glad
from that?
Jennifer. I'm glad Jennifer's still on. Yeah, what you are tracking, and so let me explain it real quick to Jennifer. And this might help people on the podcast that aren't familiar with this. Is Wolford is tracking what he thinks are, what he supposes are the top 500 companies in this geospatial business. It's hard to define, but he's done a pretty good job of it. And based on his calculations, he's sort of tracking the health of those 500 companies, the kinds of investments they have, the kinds of profit loss that they have. Obviously, for the handful of public companies, that's
It's
easier
a
to
lot of
track.
loss, Mark. It's a lot of loss.
For the private companies, not so easy. But essentially have like an S&P 500 for geospatial technology companies. That's important to us because to tell this story, we needed to tell the story about why it would be important to move it to St. Louis, or to tell the story about why geospatial technology is important and why you should invest in it or why you should leverage it, is to tell the story of those 500 companies. So we're looking to learn from you on this. We're looking to be able to take the data and hopefully, speak it into existence and say it in layman's terms, be able to explain to business people and investors that don't necessarily know what geospatial is, be able to show them examples, the use cases that you wanted to talk about, show them examples,
Yeah. Like,
from
what did
the
this collection of
geophenomenon.
companies produce in the past week? Yeah, I mean, I have. It's been an odyssey. I didn't expect the number of nights up awake until 5 a.m. Were not anticipated, but it's amazing. There's many ways that I try to track it all. There's a watch list in TradingView. There's even a Twitter list or an X list where you've got all the X accounts of these companies. And it's really interesting to see you've got collected in one feed, essentially the geospatial industry announcements in terms of, significant commercial ones. So there's tons of data coming off our industry is what I'm trying to say. And I'm lost, I have to confess. I'm lost. It's a fire hose. And so it's a privilege to come to you, Mark, because you want to apply this information somehow or get some signals out of the noise. I
That's right.
confess, really, I've only got noise at the moment. So what kind of signals do you need?
Um, Look, there's still skeptics of the hype cycle.
Yeah.
And we need to give them as much truth as we can. And so I know it's some of this that you're doing. Kentucky windage. You're familiar with that term, Wilfred?
No,
Being from
I'm an Australian.
there we need to be able to speak truth here. We need to be able to say, look, this is what we think the industry is doing. This is the health of the industry. These are the companies that are making money now, and these are the reasons why we think they're making money.
You mean sort the wheat from the chaff, Mark?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, well, definitely you can do that because you can straightforwardly see, honestly, any one time, based on the annual reports, only half of these are making money. So none of them half of them don't have a PE ratio because you can't. This makes no sense to have a PE ratio when you've got no income. So that's puts a stop in one's tracks seeing that. Yeah, certainly what could be done is to look at the geospatial companies which tell the world that they're all about AI, and then just go to the income statement.
Yep. Yep. So we need to get people to help you, right? And
yes,
you
I need
certainly need AI agents to start helping you. So
I have been using all of them.
Yeah, so maybe we need to pitch in and get you some better ones. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, yeah. Glad to have initiated something, and this is yet another of these really important conversations I've had. For example, Joe Francica is another individual who's at the later end of his career and offered similar great insight. So, Mark, it's really nice to have individuals such as yourself serving us. And having the humility and also the desire to inspire us younger folk, in charting a course. So yeah, Mark, real privilege.
Thanks, Wilfred. Appreciate it.